let's talk about something near and dear to my heart, which lots of things are in your book, but Americans tend to think we're the kind of the center of the universe, and it's human nature, and we do live in a great country, but we fail to learn lessons from not only from history but from other places. Mm-hmm. And we're not the first country to go through stuff like this.
Yep.
And I had a recent guest, Ruth Ben-Ghiat.
Oh yeah, she's great. I quote her extensively in my book.
Well, yeah, and rightly so. And she talks about Italy. And she's lived in Italy, and she's a scholar on Italian fascism. What can we learn from other countries that have been through this?
Yeah. So, Italy's a great example with the fascism of Mussolini. I think certainly Germany with the Third Reich, and more recently Hungary with Viktor Orban. And I think that, when there have been times of great upheaval, people look for some stability and safety and security. And I think that is what some of these regimes are selling, that will keep you safe, will, it's a time often of influx of people, of technology, and it's certainly something that we're living through right now. Our world is a little bit disrupted by all of the changes in it, immigration, technology, and other kinds of things. But what we've seen in all of those regimes is that there's been a repression of freedom. And that I think, if anything, our own Declaration of Independence talks about the state, the natural state of man is one of liberty, right? We want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so these things that maybe it's a bad trade to say what I really want is safety, security, and the status quo. And I will, say what you need me to say. I'll bend to the oaths. I'll do whatever it is you need, as long as I can have that safety, security, and preservation of the status quo. But of course, what we see in all of these regimes is a loss of freedoms, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, academic freedom. And so as a result, these societies all tend to go downhill. We see scientists leave, medical research go over to other countries. And as we lose those checks on power, the leader amasses more and more power ultimately so that he can stay in power. They also surround themselves with sycophants. They don't want a competent person who pushes back and says, wouldn't it be better if we did X or Y? What they want are yes men. And what you see when you have yes men are what we're seeing right now in Putin's Russia, right? He thought he could go into Ukraine and have an attack that would last about a week and win the war. Here we are 3 years later. And may I venture what appears to me to be happening in Iran, where Trump thinks we're going to go in, it's going to be quick, we're going to take over, we're going to have regime change, and everything's going to be great. Well, he's got people like Pete Hegseth advising him. Is it any surprise that we are not successful when we don't have the best and brightest, most competent, willing to go against the grain and tell the president hard truths? So ultimately, most of these systems fail on their own. But in the meantime, a lot of people get hurt, a lot of repression, people are jailed. And I don't want to go through that before we end this regime. So I think those are some lessons we can learn from other countries in history. And I think that the sooner we get out of this path, this downward spiral, the better.
Yeah, Russia, just recently, there's been a fascinating survey. And, you think, wait a minute, they're polling people inside Russia. How do you do that? But yeah, people are not honest when they're polled. And that's what's shocking about this survey, is even knowing that the government's listening, there's an incredible, significant percentage of Russians who are telling pollsters, yeah, this war is no good. We're not happy with Putin. And the pollsters say you could probably double that to get an honest answer from yeah. So, all right. But so these systems collapse. That's good news. It's good. Give us some tangible examples from history, American history or world history, where the people did things that helped to hasten the demise of authoritarianism.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure I would call it authoritarianism, but a really interesting parallel to our own time, I think, is the Gilded Age, a time when the robber barons were getting very wealthy off of the backs of ordinary people. And some of the work that got done there was really just exposing to ordinary people this grave injustice and this incredible inequality. And so journalists, they called them the muckrakers,
Yeah.
went around and photographed people living in tenements. And then they would photograph people going into the, high society Vanderbilt Mall and our mansion on Fifth Avenue. We had a lot of books at the time about, terrible conditions in meatpacking plants, food and drug contamination, all of these things, the corruption and bribery that was going on in the railroad industry to help lift up certain companies over others. And I think exposure of those things in great part through journalists and authors. Theodore Roosevelt was someone who observed all of these things firsthand and became a progressive Republican who cared about things like child labor laws, which were passed to help kids out of these unsavory conditions in factories, passing of the first Food and Drug Acts to protect our food from contamination when they're in these horrid meatpacking plants. We saw the passage of conservation laws and the establishment and expansion of our national parks, because Theodore Roosevelt said, nature should be enjoyed by everybody, regardless of your station in life. We shouldn't let this be developed by just the Vanderbilts, and the Rockefellers. We should let's set aside a lot of land for everybody to preserve. So I think that's one really interesting moment. I think another is the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And one of the things that really helped, I think, was the advent of television, when people could see the atrocities being done to these peaceful protesters in the South. You've got Black men and women and children dressed in their Sunday finest trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or walk the children's march down in Birmingham, Alabama, where they get sprayed by fire hoses and attacked with police dogs. I think people of good faith, saw this, and it really opened their eyes to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know. I hear, complaints about voting rights, but I had no idea there was this kind of hatred. And that, I think, brings people, the independents, the people who tend not to get involved, the middle of the roaders. I think those people, when you can capture their attention and their hearts, that's when things can change. And then the last one I'll mention, Frank, I'm a big fan, I quote him a bunch of times in the book, of Justice Robert H. Jackson Jr. He was a Supreme Court justice. He was also an attorney general at one time. And he also, this is so extraordinary, while he was a justice on the Supreme Court, takes a leave of absence to go over and be the Nuremberg prosecutor after World War II. Imagine that day, right?
Yes.
Like Elena Kagan says, hey guys, I'm going to be gone for about a year. I'm going to go prosecute this big case. But he did. And I think one of the lessons of that is it was important to show the world what had happened in Nazi Germany, atrocities that perhaps were not more widely known, showing the evidence. Here it was, this really happened. I think that helps avoid all the Holocaust deniers. President Eisenhower went through and had somebody film the camps and, the deplorable conditions that people were living in these concentration camps, because he said someday people are going to deny this happened, and we need to make sure that it's documented and memorialized for history. And so he did that, convicted these war criminals and held them accountable to justice. I think after this administration is over, there's going to be this urge to let's just move on, in the manner of, Gerald Ford, thank goodness our long national nightmare is over. I'm going to pardon Richard Nixon. I think there's going to be a temptation to do that. And I hope we resist that temptation, because I think without accountability, we may see this happen again. Why did we see Nixonian politics happen again? Perhaps it's because Richard Nixon was never held accountable for what he did.
For sure. So no, I'm with you.
Arise again.
I'm with you on that. And I know my viewers are getting sick of hearing me say this, but you got to watch Nuremberg on Netflix. It's free now. You don't have to pay if you've got Netflix. and the story of Justice Jackson and Nuremberg trials is there, and it's not only great acting, but it's a great essential story for our times.